Listen. I am Mama Otomba, and I still remember the sound that train made the first night it crawled through Harlem without touching the tracks beneath it. The sound was not iron and steam like the old engines that once carried colored folk north from Georgia and Mississippi with tired shoes and hungry bellies. No, the sound was softer, like a trumpet crying behind a church wall, like chains dragged slowly across velvet, like a coffin lid being closed with great care. It came during the winter of 1953 when the snow turned gray before it ever reached the sidewalks, and the nights in Harlem smelled of cigarette smoke, bourbon, sweat, fried catfish, and sorrow hidden beneath laughter. I was already an old woman then, living above Lenox Avenue in a narrow apartment painted blue with ash marks around the windows, where candles had burned too close to the curtains over many years. People came to me when doctors could not cure their nightmares. They came when their babies spoke with dead voices in the middle of sleep. They came when husbands vanished after gambling at backroom clubs, and when strange shadows stood at the foot of their beds, breathing like animals. Some called me Root Woman. Some called me Witch. Some crossed themselves when I passed. But every soul in Harlem knew Mama Otomba carried old things inside her spirit. Things older than New York, older than America itself. Things carried across black waters in the bones of my grandmother from the deserts near Timbuktu, where men once whispered to spirits hidden beneath the dunes. The jazz clubs along 125th Street never truly slept in those days. Even at 2 in the morning, music leaked through alleyways like blood from a wound. Trumpets screamed toward heaven while upright basses groaned low enough to shake loose memories from the dead. Men in polished shoes staggered beneath glowing signs, while women wrapped in fur coats laughed through exhaustion, because laughter was cheaper than peace. But that winter something changed in the music. The notes became wrong. Not bad. Wrong. I heard it first at the club called the Blue Serpent, hidden beneath a tailor shop near 7th Avenue. Smoke floated so thick inside that faces looked half-formed like spirits caught between worlds. A young trumpet player, named Isaiah Reed, stood on stage under a dim amber light with sweat shining across his forehead, while his fingers trembled against the brass valves. Isaiah was gifted in a way that frightened people. When he played, even drunks stopped talking. Women cried quietly into their drinks without knowing why. Men stared at the floor, remembering things they buried years before. That night Isaiah began with a slow blues melody, but halfway through the song his eyes rolled upward, until only the whites showed. The room turned cold enough for breath to rise from mouths. Then he played notes I had never heard before in all my years. They did not belong to jazz. They did not belong to any music made by living hands. Those sounds twisted through the club like dark smoke searching for something. Glasses cracked. One woman fainted near the bar. A candle exploded beside me without warning. And beneath the music I heard another sound hiding inside the trumpet. Voices whispering in a language older than English, older than Africa, older perhaps than mankind itself. Isaiah stopped suddenly and collapsed to the floor, coughing blood onto his white collar, while the audience sat frozen in silence. I walked to him before anyone else moved because I already knew something terrible had entered Harlem. When I touched his forehead, my fingers burned with unnatural heat. His lips trembled and he whispered only 3 words before losing consciousness. He said, "The midnight train." I brought Isaiah to my apartment above Lenox Avenue because hospitals could not help a sickness carried by spirits. Snow fell outside while I prepared herbs in iron bowls blackened from years of ritual fire. The apartment smelled of sage, tobacco leaf, and old cedarwood from my homeland. Isaiah shook violently beneath blankets while shadows moved strangely along the walls, though no candle flickered. I placed protective symbols around his bed using white ash and salt, imported from West Africa long ago. Near dawn his eyes opened wide, and for a moment they did not belong to him. They looked ancient, tired, hungry. He grabbed my wrist with impossible strength and spoke in a voice layered with another voice beneath it, deep and hollow like sound echoing from underground tunnels. "They are coming back for us," he said. "The train only stops for musicians." Then he began screaming. Lord, I still hear those screams when rain strikes my windows at night. They were not screams of pain. They were screams of recognition, as if Isaiah had seen someone waiting for him in darkness, and wished with all his soul that he had not recognized their face. The candles extinguished themselves at once. Every single one. The room dropped into darkness so sudden my old heart nearly stopped. Then came the sound again. Soft. Distant. The train. I hurried to the window overlooking Lenox Avenue, and there, moving slowly through the snow without touching the street, was a black locomotive glowing faintly silver beneath the moonlight. No steam rose from it. No wheels turned. Yet it moved with terrible purpose past sleeping buildings and shuttered storefronts. The windows along its side glimmered pale blue, and inside them I saw silhouettes sitting motionless in rows. Men holding saxophones, trumpets, violins, their heads bowed low like mourners at a funeral. My blood turned cold because I recognized some of those faces from Harlem clubs years earlier. Musicians who had died. Men buried in cemeteries from Brooklyn to Louisiana. One figure lifted his head toward my window, and I saw empty eye sockets staring directly at me. Then the train vanished into the falling snow without sound. Behind me, Isaiah whispered, "It waits beneath the city during daylight." I turned from the window slowly, feeling the weight of old fears I had not touched since my childhood in Africa. My grandmother once told me stories beside desert fires, about spirits who traveled between worlds carrying the souls of artists because music opened doors the dead could walk through. She warned me never to trust melodies played after midnight, because some songs were invitations. I had not believed all her stories when I was young. America makes people forget old truths. But that night in Harlem the past returned, breathing cold against my neck. Isaiah sat upright in bed, trembling violently. Blood leaked from his nose while his eyes darted toward corners of the room where nothing stood visible to ordinary sight. "They played for the train," he whispered. "At the club downtown near the river. They made us play songs we never heard before. And when the music stopped, they boarded." I asked who boarded. But Isaiah only stared at me with pure terror before saying the words that opened the gates of nightmare over Harlem. "The dead musicians never left the train, Mama Otomba. They only keep collecting more." Isaiah would not sleep after that. Every time his eyes closed, his body jerked violently as though invisible hands were dragging him somewhere far beneath the earth. Dawn arrived, pale and sickly, through the frosted windows of my apartment, while Harlem slowly awakened outside with rattling delivery trucks, shouting vendors, and the distant moan of saxophones escaping basement clubs, where men played until sunrise because silence frightened them more than exhaustion. Yet inside my rooms the air remained heavy with something ancient. Even the candles burned strangely, their flames bending sideways without wind. I brewed bitter tea from cola bark and desert herbs, while Isaiah sat wrapped in blankets, staring toward the door, as if expecting death itself to walk through it at any moment. Around noon he finally spoke again. His voice sounded weak now, scraped hollow from terror. "The club was called Pharaoh's Lantern," he said. "Down near the Hudson warehouses. Nobody talked about it openly. You got invited or you stayed away." I knew the place by reputation, though I had never entered it. Harlem in those days hid many secret rooms beneath the music and liquor. Some welcomed gamblers. Some welcomed prostitutes. Some welcomed politicians seeking dark pleasures hidden from newspaper cameras. And some places welcomed things not born human. Pharaoh's Lantern had whispers wrapped around its name for years. Musicians who played there too often either disappeared or changed afterward. Their music grew unnatural. Too beautiful. Too painful. Like hearing heaven cry from behind locked gates. Isaiah swallowed hard before continuing. "A man called Sweet Gabriel brought me there," said a rich white collector, paid musicians to perform private midnight sessions. "Good money? No questions?" His hands began trembling again. At first it seemed normal. Smoke everywhere. Jazz pouring through the walls. Men drinking champagne while women danced slow beneath red lights. Then around midnight they locked the doors. He looked toward me with eyes clouded by shame. They brought out instruments none of us had ever seen before. Black horns carved with symbols. Drums stretched with pale skin that looked too much like human flesh. The band leader told us not to stop playing no matter what we heard. Outside my apartment somebody laughed in the street below, but the sound felt impossibly far away as Isaiah continued speaking in whispers. The songs changed after the first hour. Nobody taught us the melodies. Our hands just knew them somehow. It felt like dreaming with your eyes open. The room became colder and colder until frost covered the liquor bottles. Then the walls disappeared. He stopped breathing for a moment, staring at something only he could see. There were train tracks running through the club, Mama Otomba. Endless tracks stretching into darkness. And the train came out of nowhere. I felt old fear tightening inside my chest, because my grandmother had once described spirits traveling between worlds by iron roads hidden beneath reality itself. In Africa she called them the roads of Nuru, pathways where wandering souls could be harvested by entities older than mankind. She claimed music guided those spirits like lanterns in darkness. I prayed silently while Isaiah spoke again. The passengers were all musicians. Some wore old funeral suits from New Orleans. Some looked like African drummers wrapped in ancient cloth. One man carried a trumpet fused into his ribs like it had grown from his bones. They watched us play without blinking. Then one by one they started stepping off the train. His voice cracked. That's when Sweet Gabriel screamed. Snow began falling again outside, although evening had not yet arrived. Harlem streets darkened beneath storm clouds, while Isaiah described the horror inside Pharaoh's lantern. The dead passengers walked among us listening to the music. Nobody in the audience moved. They just stared ahead, smiling like statues. One dead woman kissed the piano player on his forehead, and his skin turned gray instantly. Another touched the drummer's shoulder, and he began bleeding from both ears while still playing. We couldn't stop. God help me, we couldn't stop playing. He buried his face in his hands. Sweet Gabriel tried running for the exit, but the train conductor appeared beside him. I asked what the conductor looked like. Isaiah lifted his head slowly, tall, thin, wearing a black uniform covered in desert dust. No eyes, just empty darkness beneath the cap. And his smile. Isaiah nearly choked speaking the words. His smile was stitched shut with silver thread. My apartment suddenly creaked around us, though no wind touched the building. I smelled something then. Coal smoke. Strong and bitter. Isaiah smelled it too because his face turned pale as ash. Somewhere below the streets came the distant sound of a train whistle echoing impossibly deep underground. The sound rolled through Harlem like a wounded animal crying beneath stone. I moved quickly, pulling protective charms from a locked wooden box beside my altar. Inside were bones wrapped in red cloth, silver coins marked with tribal symbols, and a small leather pouch filled with sacred desert sand my grandmother carried across the Atlantic 50 years before. I threw the sand across the floor while chanting old words in Bambara that had not been spoken in my family since childhood. The room darkened anyway. Shadows lengthened unnaturally along the walls. Isaiah grabbed my arm suddenly. It found me again, he whispered. Then somebody knocked at the apartment door. 3 slow knocks. Heavy. Deliberate. My blood froze because I already knew no living person stood outside. The hallway beyond my apartment smelled suddenly of wet earth and grave mold. Isaiah began sobbing quietly behind me while the knocking continued. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 knocks again. I approached the door carefully, holding a carved wooden talisman against my chest. The hallway visible through the peephole appeared empty at first. Then I saw him standing farther down near the staircase. Tall. Motionless. Dressed in a black conductor's uniform covered with ash and desert dust. His face remained hidden beneath the brim of his cap except for that terrible stitched silver smile. He held a lantern glowing pale blue in one gloved hand. The hallway lights flickered violently. When they steadied again, he stood directly outside my door without making a sound. Isaiah screamed behind me as the doorknob began turning slowly on its own. I pressed my palm against the wood and shouted protective prayers while the walls shook around us. The conductor did not force the door open. He simply waited outside, breathing softly through stitched lips. Then came music. Lord have mercy, the music. Trumpets moaning from somewhere beneath the building. Drums beating slow as a dying heart. Violins crying like lost children. The sound drifted through pipes and floorboards until my entire apartment vibrated with it. Isaiah collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. Blood streamed from his nose again while he whispered, "They're boarding tonight." The conductor tapped the door gently with one gloved finger. Tap. 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 Pike. Then he spoke for the first time. His voice sounded like gravel sliding across coffin wood. Every musician must finish the journey. The candles burst apart simultaneously. Glass shattered inward from every window. Freezing wind exploded through the apartment, carrying soot and train smoke, while somewhere below Harlem, the midnight engine roared awake beneath the streets. I heard hundreds of distant voices singing together, then low and mournful. The voices of dead musicians trapped between worlds, calling out through the darkness beneath New York City. And deep inside my spirit I understood something dreadful at last. The train was not merely collecting souls. It was building an orchestra. The wind screamed through my apartment while Harlem trembled beneath the roar of that unseen locomotive under the streets. Isaiah lay curled against the floorboards, shaking like a dying child, as blood crept from beneath his fingernails. Outside the window, snow spun wildly across Lenox Avenue, but through the storm I could now see figures gathering silently along the sidewalks below. Men in old suits carrying saxophones. Women wrapped in torn velvet dresses, humming funeral hymns beneath their breath. Drummers with hollow eyes and frost clinging to their skin. They emerged from alleyways and subway entrances, one by one, until the entire street looked filled with ghosts, waiting for a performance to begin. None of the living people walking Harlem seemed able to see them. Cars passed through their pale forms. Couples laughed beside them, unaware death stood inches away. Yet every spirit faced the same direction. Downtown. Toward the Hudson River and Pharaoh's Lantern. The conductor remained motionless outside my apartment door, while the blue glow of his lantern seeped beneath the frame like poisoned water. I knew then that prayers alone would not stop what had awakened beneath the city. Some doors once opened cannot simply be closed again. They require payment. Sacrifice. Old laws rule old spirits. My grandmother taught me that long ago beside desert fires under African moons. I pulled my ceremonial knife from beneath the altar cloth, the blade worn smooth from generations of ritual use, and sliced my palm open without hesitation. Blood dripped onto the wooden floor, while I whispered the names of my ancestors backward through 13 generations. The apartment grew colder still. Shadows gathered behind me slowly, taking shape like smoke, learning to stand upright. I felt them arrive before I saw them. My bloodline. My dead. Warriors wrapped in desert cloth. Priestesses carrying bone charms. Old men whose eyes held dunes and firelight inside them. Ancestors do not come because they are summoned. They come because they choose to answer. The conductor tilted his head slightly beyond the door, as though listening to them gather around me. Then, for the first time, his stitched smile twitched downward. The hallway lights exploded. Darkness swallowed everything. And beneath Harlem, the train whistle screamed, loud enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Isaiah suddenly gasped and pointed toward the window. It's starting. I looked outside and saw the impossible. The streets themselves were changing. Train tracks emerged slowly through the asphalt like bones pushing through skin. Iron rails spread across intersections and sidewalks, while ghostly passengers boarded invisible cars stretching endlessly through the storm. People walking home from clubs simply vanished when they stepped too close to the tracks. No screams. No blood. One moment they existed. The next they were gone, swallowed silently into the spirit train, moving beneath reality itself. Far downtown, a pale blue light rose into the sky near the riverfront, where Pharaoh's Lantern waited. The orchestra was gathering. And if the music finished before dawn, the doorway between worlds would remain open forever. I helped Isaiah stand, though his body felt weak as paper. You must take me there, I told him. Terror flooded his face immediately. No, he whispered. Nobody comes back from that place. I gripped his shoulder firmly. Listen to me, child. Spirits grow stronger when fed fear. But every spirit carries a wound. Every curse has a root buried somewhere in darkness. We find the root, and we cut it. The conductor knocked once more upon the door. This time the wood cracked inward beneath his hand. My ancestors gathered close around me, whispering ancient warnings in forgotten tongues, while I wrapped charms around Isaiah's wrists. Then together we left the apartment through the back stairwell before the conductor could enter fully. Harlem had transformed by the time we reached the streets. Jazz music drifted from nowhere and everywhere at once. Not joyful music. Funeral music. slow horns moaning through the snowfall, while ghost passengers filled the avenues in endless silent lines moving downtown toward the river. Some carried broken instruments fused into their bodies. Others wore burial clothes from decades past. One young trumpet player walked without a lower jaw, yet still hummed softly through his ruined throat. The living brushed past them unknowingly beneath flickering streetlights, while somewhere deep underground iron wheels thundered endlessly. Isaiah and I followed the ghost procession through freezing streets until we reached Pharaoh's Lantern near the Hudson docks shortly before midnight. The club no longer looked human. Its brick walls pulsed slowly like breathing flesh beneath dim red lights. Music leaked from the windows thick as fog, and parked outside against the curb stood the train itself. Black, endless, covered in ash and silver symbols older than language. No engine smoke rose from it because the thing did not burn coal. It burned souls. The conductor appeared beside the entrance, silently holding his lantern toward us, as though inviting honored guests inside. My ancestors crowded around me, whispering prayers against evil, while Isaiah nearly collapsed from fear. But we entered. Lord forgive me, we entered. Inside Pharaoh's Lantern, hundreds of dead musicians performed beneath crimson lights, while living audience members sat frozen at tables smiling blankly with empty eyes. The music shook the walls like heartbeat thunder. At the center of the club stood the orchestra conductor upon a raised platform carved from black stone. Not the train conductor. Something older. Taller. Wrapped in robes stitched from burial cloths. Its face hidden behind a mask made from polished human bone. Around its neck hung necklaces of teeth and rusted trumpet valves. When it raised its hands, the dead musicians played harder, louder, faster until reality itself seemed bending apart beneath the sound. Then the bone mask turned toward me. Otomba blood, it whispered, though its mouth never moved. The desert witches still remember. My ancestors surged around me in fury. Candles burst. Windows shattered. The music faltered for the first time. I stepped forward, holding my bleeding palm toward the spirit orchestra, and spoke the oldest curse my grandmother ever taught me. Words forbidden even among our people, because they severed wandering souls from the roads between worlds. The club screamed. Not the people inside. The building itself screamed. Ghost musicians collapsed where they stood while the train outside roared in agony. The bone mask conductor staggered backward as cracks spread across its skull mask. You cannot silence sorrow, it hissed. Music feeds the dead forever. No, I answered. Only grief chained them here. Then Isaiah did something brave enough to make even spirits pause. He lifted his trumpet with shaking hands and began to play. Not the cursed melodies of the train. Not the death songs. He played pure Harlem jazz. Slow. Warm. Human. Music filled with heartbreak and survival and weary hope carried north from southern fields by black souls searching for dignity in a cruel country. The sound cut through the darkness like sunrise through fog. One by one the dead musicians stopped performing. Their hollow eyes softened. Some began weeping silently. The bone mask conductor shrieked as silver fire spread across its robes. The train whistle screamed one final time so loud the earth itself seemed splitting apart beneath Manhattan. Then the locomotive outside dissolved into ash. The tracks vanished from the streets, and the dead musicians faded slowly into blue light like smoke carried away by dawn wind. Isaiah's final note lingered softly through the ruined club before silence fell at last. True silence. Peaceful silence. By sunrise, Pharaoh's Lantern had become only an abandoned warehouse beside the river. No bodies remained inside. No train tracks. No orchestra. The newspapers later blamed gas leaks and mass hysteria for the strange disappearances that winter. White men always need simple explanations for things older than reason. Isaiah never played publicly again after that night. He moved south and vanished into ordinary life, though sometimes when rain falls hard against my windows, I think I still hear his trumpet, somewhere far away beneath the storm. As for me, I remain here in Harlem watching the nights carefully, because evil never truly dies in this world. It only waits beneath the surface listening for invitations. And every now and then, Long after midnight, when jazz drifts softly through distant streets and snow falls gray beneath the moon, I still hear faint train wheels echoing somewhere deep below the city, searching for musicians foolish enough to answer the call once more.